It is the holiday season, but it's also the season for the flu and measles. It's on its way back. It's making a comeback. The biggest comeback story of 3 decades for measles. David joins me, Dr. David Hedges. I'm sure you've had the flu at least once in your life, right, David?
I have, yes. Yes, it's always a pleasure.
Well,
But
check this out. In the headlines, you have that the flu season is supposed to be pretty bad this winter as people gather for the holidays. It's said to, spread the flu around a little bit more. But also, I'm seeing that in the Carolinas, according to some headlines, in the Carolinas, that's North and South Carolina, for those outside of the United States, the measles have started breaking out. So much so that there's like over 100 cases, at least from one news story, which is pretty crazy because it wasn't, and I think it was not too many years ago that the measles was considered completely eradicated. And from what I understand, the US might lose its eradicated status for the measles. So, David, what's your reaction to hearing these headlines?
ugh, I feel like the flu is not a surprise. I feel like every year there are outbreak pockets of the flu. Flu virus mutation rate is just so fast. I think that's just how the flu works. As miserable as it is, that's how the flu works. But it's disheartening to hear that the disease that was considered eradicated is having outbreak pockets. Like that's disappointing.
So, David, you're a biochemist, doctor of biochemistry. Can you just can explain in simple terms what vaccines are? How do they work? And I know that, like, we don't even have to get into the COVID vaccine because I understand that that's like a newer mRNA vaccine or whatever, like newer technology. But let's look at kind of these more traditional ones that have been around for a long time, like measles, flu. Can you give me some insight on that?
Yeah, let me just get some clarification. So it's been a long time since I've really gone through and understood all the different components of the immune system. You want to keep this relatively high level because I think I'd make some mistakes if I started getting into
Yeah, yeah,
different
keep
cell
it high
types and the
level.
different protein versions. Okay. So yeah, so like I guess like what immunity is like I guess like from a very basic perspective, the immune system in the human body works by it recognizes foreign bodies um, using something called antibodies. Antibodies are kind of like little stickers that come in and attach themselves to a foreign body of some kind. You can think of it as like a little oh, what's the word? Like one of those little Nerf darts, little sucker on the end.
Oh, yeah,
They
like the
come
toy?
in, they stick to the like a
Yeah,
toy. Yeah, they just
yeah,
stick
the
to the
little Nerf
foreign
darts.
bodies.
Gotcha.
Uh-huh. And that operates as a flag or a signal for other immune cells to come in and destroy that foreign body. I think in most simple terms, that's probably a good way to look at it. But unlike Nerf darts, which don't stick to anything well in my experience, antibodies stick really well, but only stick to one particular thing. And that's down to like the molecular level like, for it to be able to stick to. Like it has to be a very close match for an antibody to stick. And the way that this works is, your body develops an immunity by becoming exposed to foreign bodies. So, like, generally, if you have a viral infection, you get like all of the viruses are within a relative degree of certainty, probably have the same genetic code. They probably have the same protein structures all over them. They're, for the sake of this conversation, identical. And so the body gets exposed to those, and as it ramps up its immune response, the body will produce, the immune system will produce antibodies specific to that virus. And so as the body ramps up the production, it'll finally it'll kind of come to it'll develop a way to develop specific antibodies for that foreign body. So those protein sequences on that virus the antibodies will then be produced in mass quantity. They'll go out, they'll stick, and be a signal for other immune cells to come in and wipe out the virus. Generally, how it works. And then the body preserves a memory. The immune system has a basic memory of all those previous um, viral exposures. And it's not a perfect memory. Like all of our memories, it kind of like wanes over time, and so that's why you need the concept of boosters. So you can have, you get your initial exposure to a virus, and then you'll have a good immune response, and so your immune system's primed and ready to go if that virus pops up again, and then maybe, a few years later, you need another booster against it, and so what the vaccines themselves do is generally they contain, weakened or dead or, kind of parts of viruses that then can be injected into the body, so there's a way for the immune system to become primed for recognizing those specific viral strains without there being a risk of ongoing infection. So the weakened, dead, or parts of viruses are not able to reproduce themselves, and so you're not going to get the massive viral infection in the body, and the immune system can learn what they look like. And then if you do get exposed to them, then you have, even if the virus starts replicating inside you, you'll have a much faster immune response for the body to be able to ramp up production of antibodies and wipe out the infection much faster rate. Worst consequence to kind of, it's a way to get around the worst consequences of a viral infection. Because by the way, just to like upfront, viral infections are bad. Even ones that you seem to get over really fast, there can be lifelong consequences of a viral infection. Like the Epstein-Barr virus can lead to, even if you get over the initial infection, can lead to all sorts of nasty consequences down the line, autoimmune diseases, etc. Viruses do weird things to you. So even if you can get over the initial infection, viral infections are bad. So it's best to avoid really acute viral infections as much as you can for lifelong health.
So would you say that a vaccine does help you avoid them though? Because you're just kind of you could still get the disease and just not know that you had it because you're pre-trained your immune system to recognize it and fight it off. So does it help
Right,
in the
but you
long
avoid
term?
the. I think so. I think so. I would want to. I mean, this is my own opinion. I wouldn't consider myself an expert in this area, but I would say from what little I do know, it's best to avoid the really extreme infections as much as possible. So like the really acute, really nasty infections, and vaccines help prevent those extremities.
So the level of symptoms you experience matters. Is just kind of what I'm hearing. Like how much symptoms you have is a big deal of like potentially later on problems. Does that seem correct? Based on what you're
Yes.
saying?
I would say yeah.
Okay, so check this out. Uh, I was looking up some of the research on vaccine rates, and at least in 2016 to 17, according to one paper, less than 50% of pretty much everyone in the US received a flu vaccination from 2017 to 18. Sorry, 2017 to 18. Which was a little surprising to me because I thought it would have been higher than that, but less than 50%. That's less than half of the population, which part of the benefits of vaccination, from what I understand, is like when a population gets vaccinated, then you're not spreading it around from person to person. It just kind of dies, which is what happened with measles, presumably. Like so many people got vaccinated, the measles virus couldn't really do anything anymore. And so it more or less became in the eradicated status. But if like a few people are getting vaccinated, the disease or the virus can still kind of spread around, right? So does that 50 less than 50%, and that's across four major racial ethnical groups. There's a lot of study on like different uh inequities in health and like who's getting vaccinated and who's not. But just kind of a macro view here, less than 50% of any of the four major racial ethnic groups in the US received flu vaccination. Your thoughts, David?
Because you're talking about the concept of a herd immunity, right?
Yeah, that's what it's called,
This
right? Yeah,
concept
herd
that,
immunity.
baseline levels of infectious disease can't spread, and unless there's a certain population that is available, right? There's a certain number of available hosts that continually is there. So yeah, so and when the concept of a herd immunity, yes, not everybody has to have an infection to have, like basically the disease functionally not exist. I think that I don't have any idea what the infection rates and the history of infection rates for influenza need to be for there to be a herd immunity level, but I mean, clearly, given that there's an annual flu season, 50%
It's
is
not
not
cutting it.
enough.
Well, isn't part of
I
it too, though,
It's
that
not close to
yeah,
enough.
isn't part of it too that the flu changes from year to year and there's, like, different variants, and so because it's not the same flu shot every year, right? Don't they kind of, like,
No,
make
it's not, and
educated
so this is
guesses?
this is yeah, and this is kinda like a problem that I've always had, and I first of all, I think that, there is very clear evidence that flu vaccines do decrease the infection rate, and that's good for the population at large. There are vulnerable subsets of the population that may not be able to get a flu vaccine, who could have disastrous consequences if they do get the flu, and people being vaccinated against the flu will decrease the likelihood of those people getting those disastrous infections. So with everything I'm saying, like I do think it is a good thing to do. I do believe that. I do get the flu vaccine annually myself. But I've never liked that the way that the flu vaccine works. So the way that they do it in the northern hemisphere is they look at the flu variants in the southern hemisphere during their flu season, which precedes ours by about 6 months, and they try to guess what of those flu variants and varieties are going to be the most virulent and come to the northern hemisphere to be our flu strains of the season. And then they'll create the vaccines against those vaccines
Wait, wait,
and
wait,
then
but
just hope that there are
what
no new strains that
what does the
come
Southern
in the
Hemisphere
meantime.
do? Do they base it off of the last like, the
I
Northern
don't know. I've
Hemisphere?
always asked that, and I've asked a few people and never gotten an answer for that. So I don't know what goes on in the Southern Hemisphere.
Well, maybe that's what it
As far
is.
as we're concerned, it's just a different
'Cause,
world.
I mean, it almost seems like you'd be playing
Yeah.
catch up every year because, like, the ones that break through, okay, now we're gonna base it off of those that broke through, but then those ones aren't the
Yeah,
ones that broke
exactly. And that
through, and
this
then
is the problem is it's ketchup and there's a bit of a gamble with it. And some years it works out and some years it doesn't. And I don't know. I feel like the rate of mutation for the flu is so high. I feel like it's really hard to have a perfect vaccine, which is why there's a new vaccine every year. And there's several strains of flu that are in the flu vaccine every year. It's not just one. There's several different strains, so you
oh,
do
really?
become immunized against many. Um, but yeah,
It's like a
so it's not.
shotgun
I don't know.
approach.
It's a bit of a gamble. It's imperfect. There's a bit of a shotgun approach. Yeah,
Interesting.
I don't know. They're doing their best, and I think the numbers are clear that it's making a difference. But it's always still felt in my own little world where I like absolutism. Like it's always a little dissatisfying.
Okay, so check this out. One time when I was in college, I was too busy to get a flu shot. I was working, going to school, really invested in my studies, and I got really sick. And it's one of the worst, like, flus I've ever had. It was absolutely terrible. And sometimes I think back to that and other times that I've had flu-like symptoms or the flu, and that makes me want to get the vaccine because it's like, "Okay, if there's a chance that this prevents me from feeling that way, then it's worth it." Because whenever you're sick, at least when I get super sick, especially if it's a year that I didn't get the flu vaccine, I think I would so much rather have had a shot than this. I think that a lot. But check this out. I'm not the only one who thinks that, because I was looking in a research paper from the Annals of Behavioral Medicine about the flu vaccine in particular. It probably applies to every vaccine. And they tried to study and they're trying to understand like kind of the behavior behind who's going to get a flu vaccine and who's not. And they did this little experiment intervention with people and then kind of saw like what happened with who was going to get the vaccine and how they felt towards vaccines. And what they did is they kind of randomly assigned some of these people to start writing down what they might regret about not getting a flu vaccine. So for me, if I were writing this down, I would say, okay, if I don't get a flu vaccine, if I get sick, I'm gonna regret having not got the flu vaccine. If I got it and still get sick, then I at least don't have regrets of not getting it, you know? Because you can still get sick, as you pointed out, you could still potentially get some kind of variant of the flu even if you get vaccinated. But at least I wouldn't have that regret. And it turns out, so the people who wrote this out, had greater likelihood of getting the flu shot, had more positive views on the flu vaccination. And so the kind of outcome of this paper is to suggest that like maybe this could be a way to, help improve flu vaccination rates. Because, if we could, as a population, increase it, you probably have to increase it quite a bit, but it could help, keep everyone a little bit healthier. But have you ever been sick and thought, man, I should have gotten a flu vaccine? Has that ever happened to you? Or are you just like, resilient to get it every year without fail?
So, I'll say it from a different perspective. So, one year, um, I did get the vaccine, and none of my kids did that year. And when the time came around, we were never, like, tested to confirm everything, but we think that it was probably the same thing. My wife got it, and she felt awful for, like, a week and a half, like, down. Like, she was down for the count, felt horrible, barely functioning. And similar for the kids, probably not as severe for the kids. And I was just dreading when my turn would come. Whenever we get something in the house, it just works its way through the whole family, and it's just a miserable 3-week experience for us all. And so I was just dreading when my turn would come. And one day, at the end of the day, I started feeling it coming. And by evening, I was feeling pretty awful. And so I was just thinking, okay, this is it. And I woke up feeling fine, and I didn't have any other symptoms. And so what was a week and a half of really miserable sickness for my wife was like less than half a day for me, and not nearly as severe. So could that have been because of the vaccine? Both of us, both my wife and I think that. Could be wrong, but that's what our leading theory is.
Fascinating. Yeah, see? And I'm sure in those moments you're thinking, "Oh, thank goodness I got my flu shot because I didn't wanna get sick with it."
That week, yeah, I was pretty happy because I saw how miserable my wife was. And normally when we get something in, my wife and I are hit pretty comparably. We both kind of, yeah, when one of us just doesn't have milder symptoms, generally it's
You know
pretty
what, though?
comparable.
Each flu, like, I don't know, some flus are worse than others, and, like, depending on I don't know how this works, you probably know more about it than I do with all the biochemistry, but, like, sometimes the symptoms just hit specific individuals, like, way worse than, like, what other strands hit them with or what the same strain hits a different person with. And I don't know what that is or
True.
what could cause all that, but, like, yeah, there's times where, like, the flu has been, like, just awful. There's other times where, and it's hard to distinguish between what's like a flu and what's like maybe just like a common cold, for the most part, but I mean, there's some difference in some symptoms, I suppose. Like, I think usually the flu comes with at least some level of fever where the cold doesn't. I mean, I don't know. I could be wrong about that. But yeah, like, it is interesting, like, the heterogeneity, there's a scientific word for you, in flu symptoms. And so, yeah, like, as much as there is, like, a gamble with the flu shot, there's kind of like a gamble of, like, if you get it, like, toss a coin of, like, how bad it's gonna be. 'Cause you could be in for, like, a week of misery, or it might be one that's not so bad, and maybe the not so bad ones, maybe there's something at play with, like, the level of vaccination that you've had or something, but I find that very fascinating as well. But I definitely have had bad experiences with the flu in the past that, like, I'm very willing to at least decrease my chances of getting the flu, and that's really what vaccines do at the end of the day is they significantly decrease your chances. In some cases, a lot more than others. So, like flu, we kinda talked about the nature of flu. You might not be able to guarantee 100% you're not gonna get the flu, so it's just gonna decrease your chances. But with other types of viruses, like, from what I understand, like polio, I think even measles falls into this category. Those are much more targeted vaccines that can more or less guarantee, or like, I should never say guarantee, but like give you a much stronger threshold that you're not gonna get that virus. Where do I go wrong, David?
Hmm.
Am I right about that?
I don't know if you are going wrong necessarily. And I again, like I'm not an immunology expert or a population health expert when it comes to these things. At best, I'm a pseudo-informed, washed-up biochemist. So
He's not giving
like
himself enough credit,
there's a lot of
people.
gas, but I think that matches my
All right, yeah.
understanding.
I mean, if anyone has something to correct us on, you're always welcome to shoot us an email. But as far as like a 1 minute for 1%, getting a flu shot in today's day and age in the United States, in the Intermountain West in particular, is super easy. Your insurance almost guaranteed covers the flu shot. If not, there's certain places, and I think that also just do it for free. Most of the time, it's at a grocery store, your local Kroger, Albertsons, or whatever. But if you're like a member of uh, any insurance, it's worth looking into because, like, that's the thing. You don't have to pay for it. There's ways you can get around it. Worst case scenario, if you do have to pay for it, it's usually less than $20. You go in, it's quick. You don't need an appointment. You get you get the flu shot. You get it once a year. You decrease your risk of having a terrible week-long experience of suffering with the flu, and you can help mitigate spreading it to other people if more and more people get vaccinated. So we're not saying you have to get a flu shot. I mean, obviously that's an individual choice, but it's definitely one worth considering for your health. As David said, we don't even understand the full potential of like what viruses do to us. Because one area that I think could use more research, one area that I'd love to kind of read into more is like how much viruses and sicknesses and prolonged sicknesses and like viruses that really do some significant damage to your insides and whatnot at the cellular level are associated or maybe even causally related to certain forms of cancer, uh, which I think would be a fascinating thing. And I'm not saying anything I don't know much, if anything, in that.
There's a growing body of literature that suggests that a history of viral infection leads to adverse health outcomes later in life and leads to an increased risk of chronic disease. Be worth a review of that literature in a separate episode, but that is something that
Okay, see,
seems
I
to
didn't
be the
think I was just
case.
pulling this out of nowhere. I thought I had something I was basing it off of. So I'm glad you're backing me up here. But point is like, even if you're thinking, yeah, like I don't care about being sick. Well, it might be more than just the symptoms at risk here. And we don't like that's all basically I think any science can say about at this point. And barring like, we should probably look into this a little bit more. But like, yeah, it might be more than just that that's at risk. But anyway, anyone who's considering it, you should really consider it because it's one of the easiest ways to kind of keep yourself in a healthy mood. And not to mention, when you're sick, you're not exercising, you're probably not eating well, and that, can mess up your healthy habits that you're trying to form and all of that. So I just had to throw that out there.
I want to echo that. I would say sickness is one of the biggest things that interrupts my healthy habits and does more damage to the longevity of my healthy habits than anything else. So, from my perspective, when you're talking about like what's the biggest consequence of getting sick, for me, it's the interruption to my habits that I worked so hard to incorporate into my life, and it's so hard to get back to them after being sick. To me, that's the number one reason I can suffer through the feeling miserable, but it's losing the healthy habits that I've invested months or sometimes years into and taking a risk of losing those. That's the worst for
Yeah, and
me.
we care so much about, helping people live their healthiest life possible on this podcast. If you haven't given us a review, subscribed on your favorite podcast platform or follow or whatever that button is and left a comment, please do so. But everyone, be safe during this holiday season, and we'll catch you in the next episode.